3 days into wearing these, I had to take them off and put on my old pair just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The soundstage felt wider than any closed-back wireless headphone I'd ever used. The HDB 630 feels lighter than it looks, almost deceptively so when you pick them up the first time. They're built from a dark matte material that doesn't attract fingerprints the way glossy plastics do. And the ear pads are covered in this Japanese protein leatherette that feels closer to actual leather than the synthetic stuff most brands use. When you fold them inward to store them, there's this satisfying resistance in the hinges. Not stiff, but deliberate, like they're engineered to last more than a year. The headband has a subtle give under pressure, enough cushion that you forget it's there after the first hour. I wore these on a 6-hour work session and never once adjusted them. The right ear cup has a small touch panel embedded in the surface, and it's flush enough that you don't accidentally trigger it when you're just adjusting the fit. Compared to the Momentum 4, these feel slightly more compact around the ears, but not cramped, just purposeful. The first time I connected the BTD 700 dongle and played something through USB-C instead of regular Bluetooth, the difference wasn't subtle. The soundstage lifted immediately, not just wider, but taller, like the ceiling of the audio space had suddenly been raised. Instruments separated in a way I'd only hear on open-back headphones before, and I could pinpoint where individual elements were sitting in the mix without even trying. The mid-range is incredibly neutral, maybe even a little flat depending on your taste. But that flatness comes with this crystalline clarity that makes vocals feel like they're right in front of you. The bass is there, but it's soft, not weak, just controlled. It doesn't slam you the way something like the Sony WH-1000XM6 does, and honestly that bothered me at first. I kept reaching for the parametric EQ in the app to bump the low end up just a bit, but after a few days I realized the bass actually has more detail than I'm used to. It's just not trying to impress you with volume. Compared to the Momentum 4, the HDB 630 feels more spacious and less warm, like you're listening in a studio instead of a cozy room. When you look at the product page, Sennheiser really wants you to know about the 42mm transducer and the 24-bit 96kHz playback capability, and those specs do matter. But what they don't emphasize enough is how different the sound becomes when you plug in that BTD 700 dongle. They mention it in the box contents, but it's easy to gloss over. The little adapter is what transforms the headphone from very good to genuinely impressive. And I'm surprised they don't make it the centerpiece of the marketing. They also leaned hard on the 60-hour battery life, which is accurate and absurdly long. But what surprised me more was how fast they charge. 10 minutes gives you 7 hours, which saved me on morning when I forgot to plug them in overnight. It's interesting what gets highlighted and what gets buried in the fine print. These became my default headphones for work within 2 days. I'd reach for them in the morning without thinking about it, especially when I had long editing sessions or needed to focus through background noise. The active noise cancellation isn't groundbreaking, but it's effective enough that I stopped noticing my neighbor's lawnmower. What I didn't expect was how much I'd use the transparency mode. It's smooth enough that conversations don't sound robotic, and I could leave them on while walking around the house without feeling disconnected. The touch controls on the right ear cup took me a day to get used to, mainly because there's a slight delay when you tap to pause or skip, but once I adjusted my timing, they worked consistently. After about a week, the fit started to feel even better. The ear pads softened just enough to seal more comfortably without increasing the clamping pressure. You don't really notice how much they change your setup until you go back to something else. The bass tuning is going to disappoint people who like a physical thump. It's accurate, but it doesn't hit hard enough out of the box unless you adjust the EQ. One of those small things that only becomes obvious after a few hours is the touch panel delay I mentioned earlier. It's not a deal breaker, but it's there, and you have to learn its rhythm. Another thing I kept noticing is that you can't use Bluetooth multi-point if you're also using the BTD 700 dongle, which feels like an odd limitation for a headphone at this price. It's not a deal breaker, but something I kept running into when I wanted to switch between my laptop and phone. If you're the kind of person who prioritizes soundstage and clarity over aggressive bass, and you want something that works wirelessly without sacrificing too much detail, this is absolutely worth it. But if your day is mostly commuting on loud trains or you need that visceral low-end punch for electronic music, the softer bass response may not be worth the price. I kept coming back to these even after the review period ended, which usually doesn't happen. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing the sound you're hearing is closer to what was recorded, even if it's not always the most exciting.